Hello everyone. I hope you all had a great lunch and more importantly have recovered from the rice and drinks from last night and the night before. I know I haven't, so as Mark said, please be gentle. If I start, start mumbling or stuttering, that's not necessarily because I'm nervous. I'm nervous. That's probably because I'm still having my hangover. I was looking for a bit of a beers and wine and from last night, as I say, hair of the dog. But unfortunately, there's nothing. So that's that. All right, now you know my drinking problem, a potential drinking problem, I should say. I'm not admitting that. Telstra doesn't support that thing, okay? My name is Stephen Jiang, as Mark said, and I look after Telstra's domestic optical network transport network. And today we're going to talk about something quite interesting, which is spectrum sharing, particularly in the terrestrial networks. Now, although I am breaking the light barrier in the title, please call me fake news when you find out it is not about me telling you how to travel faster than light. I don't know how to do that just yet. But I do promise you you're in for a treat, which is full of technical learnings sprinkled with fun and some puns. So let's go. All right, so today, here's our agenda today. Firstly, a quick and oversimplified introduction to optical transport and spectrum sharing. If you're in the industry, in optical industry, if you're well versed in optical, my apologies, but I do have to put everyone on the same starting baseline or foundation. I don't want anyone to be lost at the very beginning. I already have the big heavy lunch to contend with. I know a lot of people are being post-lunch slump. Then I'll briefly touch on the evolution of spectrum sharing from sea to land. From there, we'll do a deep dive into terrestrial spectrum sharing, including its key attributes and the differences between spectrum sharing services and other optical services. All right. Firstly, does anyone know what this is? Yes, indeed. Well, it was way before my birth. Sorry to rub that info from you, but yes, it is the front cover for Dark Side of the Moon album from Pink Floyd from 1973, if I'm not mistaken. It is also the picture I use when I try to explain what is optical transport and why it is the most colorful black magic to my IP colleagues, because I think a lot of them do call optical transport black magic. But it is colorful. You can't deny that, right? Literally. Now, what is the key function it serves, right? The three key functions it serves. So firstly, it converts, so to speak, a gray signal such as a 1310 nanometer into colored ones. This is done by the transponders here. And second function is it boosts all these color lights so they can go much greater distances. So this is the job of amplifiers. Now, lastly, it steers these lights so they can go to different directions. Now, this is the job of wavelength switches, or WSS, which is this guy there. Now, this particular diagram only shows one direction, right? So it doesn't really serve a particular good purpose for this slide. But in real deployments, you would see multiple directions. So the same light can be directed to go remotely, that is, not physical, remotely directed to go from Melbourne to Sydney, or to Melbourne to Hobart, or Melbourne to Adelaide, for example. Sorry, let me go back. Now, what this diagram doesn't really specifically indicate is ownership of the system, the components, and lambdas going through it. In a classic terrestrial optical transporting deployment, all these components and lambdas, etc., they are owned and managed by a single provider, such as Telstra. Spectrum sharing, on the other hand, is a construct where the full spectrum of the entire line system is divided and assigned to different operators. These operators can then use their spectrum within the spectrum range with great liberty. And they can enjoy that sort of benefits without having to operate the line system, which can be quite complex and expensive for them. As I said, the line system can be either owned or managed by one of these operators, 1, 2, 3, or it can be managed by another operator. Sorry, one thing I didn't mention now is, in this particular example, right, there are 3 transponders, and all these 3 transponders and the wavelengths carried by these transponders, they all stay within their assigned spectrum allocations. So they don't really. So if this is one of the spectrum user, the wavelengths here will always be contained within this block. Now we talk about evolution. Sorry. Just like life, optical spectrum sharing also followed the evolutionary path from sea to land. This poster was, you can probably tell, was created by Copilot, right? Now, I tried it 20 times, and I pulled half of my hair out. By the way, I only mention that just to brag I still have hair. Sorry. It was not perfect, obviously, but I thought I had to include some sort of, what's the right word, GenAI stuff, as obligatory GenAI stuff in there. I believe these days no presentation can be deemed as complete without some AI stuff. So tick that box for me, please. All right, so optical spectrum sharing is not a new concept. It's firstly proven in subsea out of a necessity. Now, the reason for that is subsea optical systems can be quite expensive or costly. So the high price tag lead to consortium joint ownership. The problem then is, how do we manage this joint ownership? The most efficient way people come up with is to partition the spectrum so that companies within the consortium can manage their own channels, while others doing whatever to their channels. One of the key enabling technology is called ASE, so the ASE stands for amplified spontaneous emission, right? So the purpose of ASE is to make sure there is always consistent optical power on the line system. It doesn't matter what everyone else is doing to theirs. So I guess a good analogy of ASE would be a room. Let's say you have a room. You go into the room, some air comes out, and you go out of the room, air comes back in. But there's always consistent air pressure in that room. All right, so next one. Technologies such as ASE have manned a landing. Sorry, I'm just making a bit of a pun there. Sorry, I can't stop myself. So these sort of technologies made spectrum sharing in the terrestrial networks a possibility, right? Now there is, unlike, deploying a terrestrial optical system is not cheap, right? Unless obviously you're a hyperscaler, then it's probably cheap for you. But it is not obviously as cheap as, it's not cheap, but it's not as costly as your submarine systems. So we spoke about submarine optical spectrum sharing out of a necessity, but when it comes to spectrum sharing in the terrestrial world, the main driver is to fill the void between managed wavelength services and the dark fiber plus running and building your own optical systems. But a key difference between terrestrial and submarine spectrum sharing, though, is for terrestrial spectrum sharing, the line system ownership is often singular. The spectrum users, the terrestrial spectrum users, just need to manage the transponders and the wavelengths, right? They don't necessarily have to manage. They don't have to manage the line system. So while they can still enjoy managing their own transponders and wavelengths and the flexibility that come with it. What's the reason for that? Because if you're IP operator, you still need but you still have a need to run intercapital traffic, for example, right? With spectrum sharing, you don't have necessarily manage your own line system, while you can still enjoy a great level of flexibility on the transponder choice, as well as capacity. One thing I have to say, this is probably the one thing I really want everyone to know, right? Copilot created this poster, but this title of the slide was entire my creation, my idea. So I'm very proud of myself for that, because I did promise you 500 pounds. I intend to deliver. So I just want to make Telstra colleagues proud, just like I deliver, just like Telstra. Okay. Okay. Now, next slide. Let's do a bit of a dive. Well, I had a diving here before. Now, also, hang on. The irony is not lost on this one, because I'm literally talking about terrestrial submarine spectrum sharing, not submarine spectrum sharing. So in this case, I changed to digging, and I will save the diving option here for my Telstra international colleagues and other subsea people here. One thing I will say though is, for abundance of clarity, the digging here is figurative. Please don't dig around. I can't tell you how much better my life would have been if people didn't cut fibers all the time by digging around. Actually, I'm a bit nervous now because I haven't checked my email for about 30 minutes. Maybe there's a several on my hand right now. Hopefully I didn't jinx it. All right, now with that disclaimer out of the way, let's start digging. For starters, we have a baseline. I think, yeah. So here's a very simple representation of a classic terrestrial optical system. Transponders, filters, wavelength switches, fibers, amplifiers, nothing fancy. Now, with a push of a button, because you can't see me pushing the button, but I'm pushing the button, we enabled spectrum sharing. One thing to note first, the CSPs here can mean both content service providers or connectivity service providers. In other words, a CSP here can be a ISP or hyperscaler. Your CSP1 and CSP2 here in this example, they connect to the line system, which is managed and owned by another operator. What is important here to note, though, is there is an adapter. The adapter or gateway function is crucial to ensure that there's adherence to the spectral allocations by different users, and there is also to ensure the physical separation between the spectral blocks. Now let's zoom in a bit on the mechanics spectrum sharing. As mentioned before, the line system is owned and operated by another, is owned and managed by another operator. The line system operator also offers and maintains spectrum sharing services. And the CSP1 and CSP2 here, they lease a block of spectrum from line system operator, and they can basically run the transponders with their choice, as long as they stay within the spectrum range allocations. So let's use example here. At the bottom, CSP1 leases about a quarter of the spectrum from the line system operator and have provisioned 3 wavelengths within its allocation. Now, you will notice, right, there's a whole bunch of a blank. This is not used. The reason why it's not in use could be many. This could be because CSP1 is in the process of replacing the current or older transponders with the greatest and latest. Why? Because CSP1 really needs to max out spectral efficiency to get the most of the spectral allocation they have. Or it could be because they're simply reversing it because there is a forecast they're going to get a huge demand coming from these end customers, so they may have to wind up a capacity really quickly. One thing to know, though, as I mentioned before, I mentioned about ASE before, right? So this unused spectrum, even though there's no actual real wavelengths right now, it's not just a void. It's filled with ASE or front-end noise. And the reason for that, as I mentioned before, is to ensure there's always consistent optical power for everyone, not just CSP1. The bottom left corner is a bit more detailed view, right, for CSP1 of the same example. So CSP1 has 3 optical services providing backhaul service to its router, single router there. And these 3 wavelength services or optical services are provisioned on 3 transponders of CSP1's own choice. And they run the 3 optical channels on a portion of CSP1's spectrum allocation. Now, there's a bit of spacing there. This space is the same as this one. and that is reserved for CSP1's use at his will, at their will, whenever they want to use it. Now, while CSP1 is doing whatever they're doing to their allocation, other spectrum users, such as CSP2 or the line system operator themselves, can also do their things, within their own allocations at their leisure all at the same time. One thing to notice, actually, probably the last thing to mention, and it's actually quite important, so important, I'll have to resort to some very cheesy animation effect. So please excuse me. I know it's a rookie mistake, but I have your attention now, right? Do I? Now, very often there's a misconception, right? Spectrum sharing services do not equate to foreign/alien wavelengths. Foreign wavelengths is a concept where pair of transponders and a line system are from different vendors. Foreign wavelengths is per wavelength basis, and that wavelength is still subject to the management and control of the line system operator. Spectrum sharing services, on the other hand, offer spectrum ranges. So within a particular spectrum range, there is a great level of wavelength sovereignty. So what are the key attributes of terrestrial spectrum sharing? I believe there are three. First one is channel independence. Second is resiliency/privacy. And the third one is enhanced monitoring. Let's talk about the first one. Channel independence. Now we are sharing the same line system with everyone else. It is imperative for us to make sure that our wavelengths within our own allocations are protected from whatever shenanigans other users, sorry, I shouldn't use the word shenanigans, but you got the idea. Whatever things other customers are doing to theirs, we can only assume, I know we have a lot of colleagues from other SPs, but we can only assume it's a Wild West out there, right? Now, a good example could be, I have my spectrum allocation from the line system operator, but there could be another guy, another spectrum user, they're doing some stress testing, right? So they are turning up and down optical services within the allocations, so totally legit, 100 times a day. Now, if that doesn't scare you, think of you having a shower, and someone, could be a kid, could be a wife, could be anyone in your house, start turning on and off a water tap 100 times during that time. Now, you know what's part of that is? Even though your water is kept getting colder and hotter, there's not much you can do about it. You're in the shower, you're wet, and you're naked. But if you do run out, you don't really care about that. I'm not going to judge. All right, so by the same token, a proper spectrum sharing implementation must ensure a user is protected by other user changes, right? So analogy, I was going to say a good analogy, but I'm not sure it's good. But analogy there, as you can see, is we have a really noisy neighbor, right? Now, so channel independence means that we are protected or shielded from the noise from our neighbor. So we can focus on doing whatever we need to do without worrying what happens next door. But this is not enough. What if our neighbor is not only noisy but also nosy? To address that, we need to have tall fences and thick curtains so that our annoying neighbor can't just climb over the fence and peek into the house. We probably otherwise they need a restraining order, but that's anyway. Likewise, the second key attribute for spectrum sharing is physical separation to ensure there can be no performance impact or privacy breach as a result of other users' configurations or misconfigurations. The third attribute, which is quite often forgotten in spectrum discussions on spectrum sharing, is enhanced monitoring. Enhanced monitoring, as in the sense of on the per spectrum block to a particular operator, not on the per wavelength basis within that spectrum allocation. So it is the enhanced monitoring. The focus is on the block, not on the wavelength within the block. Okay. Why is it important? Well, how do I put it this way? Just like a marriage, right? Once the honeymoon, when you have a honeymoon, it doesn't really matter. But once the honeymoon is over, the couple needs to really quickly, for the sake of marriage, for longevity of marriage, they really need to work out who does the dishes, who cooks. I'm the dishwasher, by the way. I cannot cook, if you're wondering. By the same token, spectrum sharing also needs to make sure it can clearly define the responsibilities between the line system operators and the spectrum users. This is particularly important when things don't work as expected. Enhanced monitoring helps the line system operators quickly identify and fix issues on its side, and leaving the CSPs or spectrum users alone to deal with their own channels. Now, let's give our noisy and nosy neighbor a break. And I'll try really hard to bring them on this neighbor analogy into the system, but I failed. So now we're going to use a different analogy, right? Let's say we have our power company monitors all the issues, our power company proactively monitor all the issues on the grid, and including the leading power cable from the street to my house, while I am managing my own house electric system myself. So, yeah, there. Now we talk about choices. Up until recently, when it comes to optical, there were largely only two options. The first one is manage the wavelength services, which is the most popular one. And the other one, well, maybe I should say on the other end of the spectrum. There was no one laughing. Come on. I really liked it. Anyway, it's a difficult crowd. Sorry, did I say that out? Oh. All right, cool. Where am I? Yeah, so the other end of the spectrum, I'm going to try this again. We have a dark fiber lease plus running a full-fledged optical system. Now, these two, as you can imagine, are quite a polar opposite. Spectrum sharing services position themselves right in the middle of the two. Now, let's dig a bit deeper about the comparison of the three types of optical services, right? Wavelength services is very simple. The problem is you don't get as a CSP, you don't get much control over it. All you get is fixed capacity, which, by the way, I'm not saying is a bad thing. It depends on requirements. It can be a good thing or bad thing, right? Dark fiber lease plus a running your, and the other end, a dark fiber lease and running your own system gives the operator, the CSP, full control, but it is quite expensive and complex to run, particularly in the Australian setting. As we all know, this country is really, really big, and our population centers are quite far away from each other. So spectrum sharing there is not as cheap as, it's not as cheap or as easy, I should say. It's not as easy as just getting your wavelength services from your fabric provider, such as Telstra, I'm sure. But it's not as complex as running your own system, right, optical system. So it is I would say, a good option for certain scenarios. Now, for some, I believe it is the, let me think about what I'm about to say, right? It is the porridge, and you'll be confused why I said the word porridge, and you'll find out why. It's a porridge that is neither too hot or too cold, but it's just right. There's no denial there is, actually I'm gonna show the porridge. There's no denial the reason the AI, I'm getting the ding, all right. There's no denial there's current AI boom, right? And the opportunities and uncertainties that come with AI boom may further persuade some CSPs to favor spectrum sharing. But we can't really blame Goldilocks, now you know the reference, Goldilocks for making the decision to go to spectrum sharing, but just barely. After all, it is a new concept in terrestrial networks, right? So she's not 100% sure whether she made the right choice. We'll help her with her decision on the next slide a bit more. But for now, I just want to say one thing. When I sent this pack to our PR team to review, they made two comments. Firstly, I have no idea what you're saying. Secondly, you made two typos. And I literally had to do this. I know I didn't have to do this to this audience, but you know what? You're welcome. Before we have Goldilocks with her decision, let's recap. Today we talked about the stuff, optical spectrum sharing's evolution, the key components, attributes, and the benefits, and how these benefits can hit a sweet spot between simplicity, flexibility, security, and cost effectiveness. Now, if we were Goldilocks, how do we make a decision, right? How do we know it's the right thing for us? Firstly, we ask ourselves a few questions. Do I need a lot of capacity, particularly between do I need a lot of capacity, particularly between capital cities? Do I have a problem waiting for my optical service provider to turn up new capacity each time I need some? Or am I happy to run intercapital optical line system? I put a bracket in there as a disclaimer. I run this myself, so I know asking people to be happy is too much. Maybe I should say, are you okay to run it? Okay? And one last thing is, am I using or thinking of using coherent plugs to reduce my transmission cost? Well, if you are, you're in luck. You thought I was going to finish, but have a bonus. Before I get dinged again, I'll just quickly go through this, right? Coherent plugs are a great alternative to transponders, and they naturally facilitate IP optical convergence. The problem is they are not a magical wand that can bend the laws of physics. For distances about 100 to 120 kilometers above, we still need a line system. Now, let's assume we still don't run our line system. Now, what options do we have? You could connect your router with coherent plugs directly with third-party plugs as adding wavelengths or following wavelengths. But do you really want to do that? What is that demarcation point between you and your service provider? Now, if we consider spectrum sharing, we have been talking about spectrum sharing using transponders so far, right? But not just like the lanes on the freeway, you can drive a car or bus on the freeway. By the same token, spectrum sharing services can take in both optical transponders, wavelengths coming from transponders or coherent plugs. So, just like this, right? Now, this is our old friend CSP1 here. Now let's assume that rather than transponders, CSP1 uses coherent plugs hosted on his router, and he or they connect the coherent plugs directly into the line system via adapter. The adapter, again here, serves a natural demarcation point. All right, so I have more stuff to talk about, but I think I will save the last 2 minutes for Q&A, and I promise no more bonus slide.